Warning. This video contains opinions, so don't flip your shit, okay?
How's it going, guys? Sorry for the wait and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, I'm going to be going over the 5 things that piss me off in a story. Quick disclaimer though, the purpose of this video is not to bash any person or bash anyone's story, but rather to inform writers on the potential pitfalls their story may or may not have. Without any further ado, let's get into it. First up on the list, we have unbelievable characters, dialogue, action, etc., etc. So what I mean by this is character actions and interactions that don't line up logically with the information that has been provided by the writer. For example, let's say you're reading a story and the protagonist is a certified savage. They're top of the line badass. No one's taking them down easy. But this protagonist has a wimp for a partner, companion. Everything's fine with that. You know, not everyone can be a savage. But, you know, crunch time comes along later on in the story and the chips are down, and somehow, some way, this guy or gal who has been a wimp all novel comes through and Ex Machina saves the day. Just out of nowhere, left field. Like, now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. In fact, you really kind of want to see this type of character progression in a story. However, it needs to be just that. It needs to be character progression. People don't just change on the drop of a dime. People just don't change like that. You have to show that progression. You know, we evolve gradually over time. Whenever I run across this in a story, I find the character to be unbelievable, and it really sucks me out of the immersion. It can ruin a story. Next up on the list, we have when things don't actually happen in a story. And now this comes in a variety of different flavors, but they all leave that same bitter ass taste in the mouth. It could be anything really. It could be a dream sequence. It could be the character being in a coma. It could be a vision of the future. It could be anything, but the story doesn't make that immediately apparent, and everything appears to be progressing normally as it should. Then you hit that point where the big reveal that no, everything you've been reading and getting invested in hasn't actually happened, and your protagonist is right smack dead in the middle where they were a couple chapters ago, and you've wasted your time. A lot of times something like this is added in a story and meant to serve as like a dramatic plot twist, but usually when this happens in a story, all it really does is grind my gears. I'd even go so far as to say that when stuff like this happens in a story, it's pretty much just a big middle finger to the reader. I mean, it really sucks big time when you're reading a story and you get emotionally invested in everything that's going on, and then you find out it was all a dream. Although I feel like I should mention that there is nothing wrong with dream sequences and stuff like that when you get to enter a character's mind and it leads to progression in the story and a development of the psyche. For example, let's say your character is knocked out in a coma, and the other supporting characters jump into their brain somehow to help them out, and they discover some traumatic event that happened in the protagonist's it's a funny word, the protagonist's childhood or something, and that leads to a moment of, oh, that's why this character is that way. You know, stuff like that is cool. Moving on, the next irritant on my list is filler content. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory, but for those of you who don't know, filler content is characters, dialogue, scenes, action, anything in the story that doesn't contribute to the plot and progress the story along. Filler content is dull and boring, but even when it's not, it does nothing to serve the story. It doesn't move the plot forward. It doesn't develop characters. It just doesn't do anything. Filler content is like the bread they serve at restaurants. Even when it's tasty, you know, like the cheddar biscuits. I know you know about the cheddar biscuits. Even when the bread is tasty, it does nothing but subtract from your overall meal, if that makes sense. So, do you want to fill up on bread or the juicy steak? As far as I know, nobody likes filler content, so please, please, please don't add it into your story. Now, the next item on the list really boils my blood, and it is any type of illogical action. In other words, shit that is literally impossible. Impossible? Impossible. And this is the reason why I don't like the Fast and the Furious franchise. I can't stand it. All 1,500 of them at this point. I don't like impossible shit. If a story is rooted in reality, and I'm led by the author to believe that this reality, the world in which the story takes place, the physics operate similarly to what they do here on Earth, then I'm expected shit to function logically as they would on Earth. For example, if in a story you have a guy or a gal, doesn't matter, they jump out a window of a considerable height, I'm expecting that character's leg or ankle or whatever lower body, I'm expecting at least a sprain, a mild sprain, a couple bruises, something. People just don't jump out of windows unscathed, but action stories in movies and all that stuff will lead you to believe that people are fucking Hercules out here. Now, I know what you're thinking. Many stories out there are fictional, and as such, these stories should be treated as such. And to that, I agree. However, my issue is with whatever the writer themselves establish as part of the story's world and logic. As a reader, it is our baseline to expect the stories we read, the worlds that are being created, we expect them to operate under the laws that are familiar to us until the writer states otherwise. It's ultimately up to the writer to establish in their stories what is and is not possible in their stories. I mean, if you're writing a story and, you know, this could be a story where everybody is fucking Hercules and jumps out of windows and walks off without a scratch. Everybody was born with super strong bones or something. That's perfectly fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. However, it needs to be established first. Like if it's not established, I have to call bullshit. Hello? Is this bullshit? Yeah. Stop calling. Last up on the list, and this one kind of goes hand in hand with the last item on the list. This is when a story doesn't follow its own logic. I can't stress how much this irritates my fucking soul. What I mean by this is when you're reading a story and something is established, it's a rule of the universe, it's a law or whatever it is, and there's later on in the story, shit just functions differently for some reason. Typically you see this in a lot of sci-fi and fantasy stories. These are those special cases when there's an ancient, super magnificent, powerful warrior that is born every 1,000 years, but just this one time, just this once, 2, 3, or 4 of these magical fucking warriors are born all at the same damn time. or there's some mystic power that can only be wielded by a specific archetype of guy. He's got to be godly, buff as hell, and just a all around badass. And but the protagonist is definitely not that. But because it's the protagonist, somehow the main character is able to wield that godly power and save the day. Yeah, I'd call it bullshit, but as you've seen, they're not taking my calls anymore. What really bothers me about this is that you wrote the rules. You're the writer. Like, you told me it goes this way. So what the fuck? Nobody told you that you were constrained in some other way. Like, oh no, you can't do that. You told me these rules. It's not hard to stay consistent. Stay consistent. Be consistent. I dropped my notebook. Now, this has all been my humble opinion, and given that we all have an opinion, I'd like to know yours. So go ahead down below in the comments. Let me know the things that piss you off in the story. As always, if you enjoyed the video, why not leave a like down below? Definitely would help me out. And consider subscribing. I post new videos on Mondays, except for this past Monday because I fucking suck. But I usually do Mondays. Just randomly throw thumbs up just because. That's all for this video. I'll catch you guys in the next one.